My beloved, water is one of the most mysterious elements in creation. It is not only essential for life, but also a spiritual gateway. From Genesis to Revelation, water is seen as both a channel of blessing and a weapon of destruction. The Spirit hovered over the waters at the beginning, yet Pharaoh's army was drowned in the Red Sea. That tells you something. Water carries both power and mystery, and it is no coincidence that witches, warlocks, and those who traffic in dark powers often turn to water as a point of contact. They know that water is not just physical, it is spiritual. One strange thing witches do around water is mirror the heavens in the waters. They stand at rivers, seas, or even small bowls of water, using it as a mirror for incantations. Just as prophets look into the Word of God to see the future, witches look into water to manipulate destinies. They believe reflections in water can open portals into unseen realms. This is why some cultures warn you not to look too long into still water at night. It is not just superstition, it is because water can be used as a gateway for spiritual transactions. A second strange act is pouring libations. They pour out wine, blood, or oil into rivers, lakes, and even household water containers as a covenant. When the Bible says life is in the blood, witches take that seriously, but for evil. They use poured out liquids to make agreements with marine spirits. That is why some of you may notice your water supply suddenly becomes contaminated or unexplainably troubled. It is because water is often used as a point of sacrifice. Third, they use water as a covering. Witches often perform rituals of bathing in rivers at midnight or early dawn. This is not for cleansing the body, but for cloaking themselves in spiritual armor. They believe by immersing themselves in water at certain times, they gain invisibility in the spirit. That is why you hear of some witches claiming to disappear or fly without being detected. It is often tied to water rituals. Fourth, they store power in water. Many charms and potions are mixed with water. Some even speak incantations into a bottle of water and keep it under their beds, believing it to be a living entity that carries their assignments. Just as the Bible says water can carry the word and bring healing, witches misuse water to carry curses and bring destruction. Fifth, witches use water as a weapon of exchange. They send dreams of drowning, swimming, or being married in water. Those dreams are not ordinary, they are contracts. When you wake up from a dream of being in water, often you have been summoned into a spiritual covenant without your permission. That is why many people face constant setbacks after such dreams, because the enemy used water to sign them into a spiritual transaction. Sixth, they gather at water sources to consult marine spirits. Large rivers, lakes, and oceans are seen as altars for them. Just as God commanded altars for His presence, witches set up water altars for the enemy's presence. They chant, they call names, and they trade destinies at these waters. That is why some regions near rivers suffer strange cycles of poverty, immorality, and violence. It is not natural, it is spiritual manipulation through water. And seventh, witches often use water to transfer spirits. Someone may hand you a cup of water, or they may sprinkle it in your doorway thinking it is innocent. But water can be bewitched. It can be prayed over with curses and become a carrier of evil forces. That is why you must always pray over your water, your drinks, your food, because witches know that water is one of the easiest carriers of spiritual power. Beloved, water was created by God as a blessing, but the enemy tries to corrupt what God has made. Witches understand that water is a spiritual force, and they manipulate it to gain access into people's lives. That is why you must sanctify the waters of your life. Never take water lightly. Use it as God intended, but never ignore how the enemy tries to pervert it. For what you do not understand, you cannot conquer, and what you tolerate, you cannot change. When you study carefully, you will notice that in almost every culture, witches are drawn to water at unusual times. They don't go at noon when the sun is high. They prefer midnight hours, when the stillness of the night makes the waters appear like glass. That timing is intentional. Midnight is the hour of transition, when a new day is birthed. And they understand that what is released at midnight often governs the course of the day. So when they gather by rivers or lakes at that time, they are not just whispering words. They are programming destinies into the currents of water that will flow into households and cities. Some witches also practice naming rituals over water. They will call your name repeatedly at the edge of a stream or lake, letting the ripples carry it. Why? Because water carries sound, and sound is spirit. They believe by speaking your name into the water, they can draw your soul into bondage. That is why some of you may feel unusually restless after your name has been mentioned in the wrong place. It is because your identity has been tampered with through water rituals. Others perform burials in water. They take items that represent you, hair, clothing, photographs, and sink them into rivers or seas. In their world, when your representation is buried in water, your destiny is chained in a watery prison. This is why some people face delays that make no sense. Opportunities come, then suddenly vanish. It is not always natural. Sometimes it is because a part of their life has been buried in water. Another practice is summoning marine spouses through water. Many men and women have strange dreams of being married or repeatedly seeing themselves pregnant, breastfeeding, or even engaging sexually in water settings. This is not mere imagination. Witches and marine spirits use water to bind people in spiritual marriages that water covenants. Witches also use whirlpools and tides as signals. When you see unusual, sudden turbulence in waters that were once calm, it can be a sign of activity. They believe moving waters can carry their words farther and faster. Just as the Spirit of God rides upon the waters, they attempt to ride upon the movement of waves to spread their curses across territories. They also practice covering objects with water to keep them hidden. A charm, idol, or cursed object might be submerged in a jar or basin filled with water, hidden under a bed or buried in the ground. The water acts as both a storage and an incubator for the spirit inside. This is why sometimes when you enter certain homes, you sense heaviness because there is water being used to conceal demonic assignments. And then there are those who use rain for enchantment. When storms arise, they dance or chant under the rain, believing that the heavens and waters above can be manipulated to open gateways for spirits. Some even collect rainwater in pots, mix it with powders, and use it as a potion for curses. They know water coming from above carries energy, so they corrupt it with their evil works. Water is not just a physical element, it is a divine mystery. Every culture reveres water because instinctively humanity knows it is more than liquid. It is life, it is a gate, and it is a carrier of unseen realities. In the spirit realm, water becomes an altar, and witches who operate in imitation of the spiritual laws of God take advantage of this mystery. They corrupt what was meant to give life and use it to bind, to curse, and to control. One of the strangest things witches do around water is to whisper incantations into flowing rivers. The current carries their words like a messenger. Just as the Bible declares that the voice of the Lord is upon many waters, witches attempt to mimic that principle. They speak curses into the streams, and as those waters flow from village to village, city to city, their words are spread like invisible pollution. People who live downstream suddenly struggle with confusion, immorality, violence, or sickness, not realizing that the source is not only natural contamination, but spiritual pollution released into the water. Another practice is the use of bowls of water as crystal portals. Just as a prophet may pray and see visions, witches gaze into water for visions of destruction. They place candles around a basin of water, darken the room, and stare until they begin to see faces, names, or images. They call it divination. But what they are doing is opening their spirit to demonic whispers through the reflective power of water. Fogena, that is why the prophets of Baal in ancient times were always near rivers and seas. They understood water as a channel of contact. Some witches also practice planting spirits in water. They take certain objects, beads, dolls, coins, or even carved images, and submerge them into lakes or oceans after chanting spells. Those objects serve as doorways. Whenever someone steps into that water, unknowingly they come into contact with those spirits. Many unexplained drownings, strange sicknesses after swimming, or repeated accidents near rivers are connected to these hidden spiritual plantings. The water was not just natural, it was weaponized. There is also the practice of washing curses into rivers. When witches perform rituals with blood, ashes, or powders, they often wash their hands in streams. That washing is not to cleanse their bodies, but to deposit evil into the water so that the flow can carry it into the community. You may notice places where epidemics or sudden deaths break out repeatedly near water bodies. Sometimes it is not medicine that is the answer, but spiritual cleansing of the waters. Sometimes it is not. Another strange thing is night bathing under moonlight. This is one of the oldest witchcraft practices. At certain times of the month, especially during full moons, witches bathe in rivers or seas. They believe the combination of moonlight and water activates stronger energy for their spells. While you may see it as superstition, it is not harmless. They are aligning the elements, water and light, to fuel their enchantments. That is why the Bible warns against worshipping the hosts of heaven. Witches know how to invoke those hosts through the waters. Witches also trap voices in water jars. They take bowls of water, chant over them, and then cover them tightly. They believe the water holds the voice of the spell until it is released. Some even claim to capture the voice of their victims, storing it in water so that they can silence them. This is why some people suddenly lose boldness, their voice trembles, or their words are easily ignored. It is as if their influence has been stolen. Witches understand the symbolism of water as a container of sound and use it for evil. In many traditions, witches are known to walk across rivers barefoot while murmuring spells. This act is meant to draw strength from the spirit believed to dwell in that water. In ancient cultures, rivers were often worshipped as gods, and witches, aligning themselves with those entities, crossed the water barefoot as a covenant act. What appears like a harmless ritual is actually a signing of contract with marine powers. They also hide sacrifices at the bottom of rivers. When you see chickens, goats, or even items wrapped in cloth floating or buried in shallow waters, do not take it lightly. Those are offerings. Blood sacrifices poured into water serve as legal grounds for witches to call upon spirits. They know that life is in the blood, and when blood touches water, it becomes a spiritual key to open doors. Many territories where such rituals are done experience generational oppression because covenants were made in water that still speak generations later. Another act is invoking mirror worlds through water dreams. Witches program people to dream of rivers, oceans, or constant swimming. These dreams are not innocent, they are signs of spiritual exchange. When a person continually dreams of water, it often means their soul is being pulled into another world, what some call the marine kingdom. In that realm, covenants are made, virtues are stolen, and destinies are exchanged. Many dream of being celebrated in water only to wake up to shame and rejection in real life. What is honored in the dream is usually stolen from the physical. Some witches also tie knots near water. They take strings, tie them, and drop them into rivers while chanting the names of their victims. The knots symbolize restrictions. As long as those knots remain submerged, the person experiences limitations, financial delays, health struggles, or relationship breakdowns. To the natural eye, it's just a piece of rope, but in the spirit, it is a chain. They also summon storms through chants over water. You have heard of sudden winds, unexpected floods, or violent storms that come out of nowhere. Witches know how to manipulate weather patterns by speaking into seas or lakes. They stir the waters until the winds obey their voices. Remember, even in the days of Jesus, storms were not always natural. He rebuked the wind and the waves, treating them like personalities. That means behind storms, there can be spirits. Witches practice naming unborn children by water. Pregnant women are sometimes lured into rivers for cleansing. Unknown to them, witches call the names of marine spirits over the womb, dedicating the unborn child to the water. The child grows up with unusual battles, strange cravings, or unexplained struggles, because their destiny was sealed at water altars, even before birth. This is why in some cultures, babies are immediately washed in rivers at birth. It looks cultural, but in the wrong hands, it is covenant making. They also use water to erase footprints. After performing evil deeds, witches often wash their hands and feet in streams to erase spiritual traces. Just as righteous people use water in baptism to symbolize cleansing, witches use water to hide the evidence of their works. They know water has a cleansing power, but instead of using it for purity, they use it to cover their guilt. Another strange thing is the creation of water spirits through statues. Witches sometimes drop idols or carved images into lakes and worship them as gods of the water. Over time, the spirits assigned to those idols inhabit the water and become territorial. This is why some lakes and rivers are feared by locals who say they are haunted. It is not imagination, it is witchcraft, making covenants with water spirits. There are also witches who capture stars through water. They place bowls outside at night filled with water and wait for the reflection of stars and moon to appear. Then they chant incantations into the reflections, believing they are capturing heavenly bodies into the water. They know stars represent destinies, and by manipulating reflections, they attempt to manipulate lives. That is why you must not ignore dreams of stars falling into water or being lost in rivers. It symbolizes stolen glory. Others practice crossing waters with cursed items. They carry baskets, clothes, or jewelry belonging to their victims and dip them into streams while muttering curses. The belief is that as water soaks into those items, the spirit of the person is also soaked into bondage. Some who later wear those clothes feel heaviness, confusion, or constant misfortune. It is because their items were used in water rituals. Some witches use water for time delays. They suspend objects in bottles filled with water and hang them where they can slowly sink. As the object sinks, they believe the person's life will be delayed in the same way. People with these curses often experience situations where everything they try takes years longer than it should. They are always moving, but never arriving, because their life has been slowed through water manipulation. They also make footprints in wet sand near water and call names as they walk. Those footprints become spiritual markers. Just as God asked Job if he had commanded the morning, witches attempt to command destinies by linking footprints to water, a symbol of time and flow. When you notice repeated failure at the same point of progress, sometimes it is because footprints tied to your name have been buried near waters. Another mystery is the use of tides for timing. Witches align their rituals with the rising and falling of tides. They believe when the tide rises, their power increases, and when it falls, their curses are released. That is why certain attacks in people's lives come in cycles. Every month, every season, because the spells are tied to the rhythm of the water. They also use sprinkling of bewitched water in homes and businesses. It may look like a harmless act of cleaning or blessing, but the water has been spoken into. When it touches floors, doorways, or walls, it releases confusion, heaviness, or division. Many families suddenly begin fighting after such sprinkling. It is not because of personality clashes, but because water was used as a carrier of strife. Another practice is the calling of ancestors through rivers. They stand at water edges calling on the dead, believing water carries voices between worlds. They mix ancestral worship with water rituals, summoning spirits of the departed. But what answers them is not the ancestors, it is familiar spirits, demons, that impersonate the dead to keep generations in bondage. Some witches trap dreams in water basins. Before sleeping, they place a bowl of water under their beds and chant. They believe the water will capture their victims' dreams, leaving them restless or dreamless. This is why some wake up tired, unable to recall dreams, or constantly fearful at night. It is because their dreams are being intercepted by water enchantments. Witches also use dew as a weapon. Early morning dew collected on leaves or grass is sometimes gathered into containers. They believe dew is the breath of the night and use it to strengthen their curses. Some even sprinkle it on objects belonging to victims to release spells. And then there is the practice of spiritual fishing. Just as fishermen cast nets, witches sit by rivers with strings or hooks, chanting while casting into the water. They believe they can fish out the glory, health, or destiny of their victims. Dreams of being caught by nets, hooks, or dragged by water creatures often symbolize such spiritual fishing. Witches also tie living creatures to water rituals. They take birds, goats, or even fish, and after sacrificing them, they cast the remains into rivers or seas. These sacrifices are not random. Each animal carries symbolism in the spirit realm. Birds represent freedom and destiny, goats represent provision, and fish represent multiplication. By throwing them into water, witches attempt to lock up those blessings so that their victims live without freedom, without provision, and without multiplication. Another strange practice is the chanting of names into seashells filled with water. They whisper names, curses, or decrees into those shells, believing the sound is captured in the water within. When the shell is later blown into the air or poured into the sea, the words are released to travel into the atmosphere. This is why sometimes you feel oppressed by words that were never spoken directly to you, because they were spoken into water on your behalf. Witches also use rivers as banks for spiritual deposits. Just as you deposit money in a bank for safekeeping, witches deposit stolen virtues in water. They take what belongs to others, glory, talent, health, and bury it spiritually in rivers and lakes so it cannot be retrieved easily. That is why some of you feel you are not living the life you were born for. It is because your virtue has been stored in the waters. One practice few talk about is the use of water shadows. At dawn or sunset, when shadows reflect on water, witches perform enchantments using those reflections. They believe that if they can manipulate your shadow on the water, they can manipulate your entire life. That is why some cultures forbid looking at your shadow in rivers at night. The shadow is a representation of the soul, and witches know how to twist it through water rituals. Witches also practice silent soaking. They sit quietly in rivers, sometimes for hours, without speaking. To the natural eye, it looks like bathing or relaxation, but in the spirit, they are drawing energy from marine spirits. Silence is not always innocent. In this context, it is an act of communion. They emerge with strange powers. Because their soaking is a form of demonic baptism, there is also the exchange of rings in water rituals. Many women and men report dreams of being married in water or receiving rings while standing in rivers. This is not symbolic romance. It is witchcraft marriage. That ring in the dream is a covenant token. It ties the victim to a marine spouse who siphons their blessings. Such victims often face endless relationship breakdowns, financial lack, and spiritual dryness because their virtue is being drained by their unseen partner from the water realm. Love, like liquid, saves you from obsession. Health is neither spiritual. Another strange activity is marking stones and casting them into lakes. Witches carve or paint symbols on stones, then throw them into water while naming people or territories. The stones act as anchors. They believe that as long as the stone remains in the water, the named victim will remain stuck, unable to progress. That is why some families or towns remain bound in the same cycles for generations, because their destinies are anchored at the bottom of a river. They also use raindrops for binding. When rain falls, witches gather drops in bowls, chanting as they collect them. They believe each drop carries a voice from the heavens. Once gathered, they whisper curses into it and pour it back onto the ground, binding whoever's name was mentioned into cycles of defeat. Many people wake up after heavy rains with strange oppression or fear, because witches use rainfall as an opportunity for enchantment. Now the practice is creating water effigies. They mold figures of people out of clay, fill them with water, and seal them. These figures act as substitutes for real human beings. As long as the water inside remains trapped, the person's life is trapped. If the witch pours the water out suddenly, the victim experiences sudden loss, collapse of business, or even premature death. Witches also perform singing rituals at water edges. These are not songs of joy, but coded chants. They sing in tongues of darkness, releasing vibrations into the waters. Remember, sound travels far and fast in water, so their melodies ripple through the river, spreading enchantments over wide areas. That is why some rivers carry reputations of being cursed. It is because songs of darkness have been sung over them for generations. Some witches also bury mirrors at the bottom of rivers. Mirrors reflect images, and once enchanted, they serve as gateways. When submerged, the mirror connects the physical realm to the marine realm. Witches then use these hidden mirrors to monitor people's lives as if watching them on a screen. Victims of such monitoring often feel constantly watched, unable to progress, as if someone is always interfering with their steps. There is also the practice of writing on water. With powders, ashes, or chalk, witches write words on the surface of rivers or bowls of water. Though the writing fades quickly, the words are believed to sink into the spiritual atmosphere. They may write curses, names, or decrees. Even when the writing disappears, the spell continues to operate. Another strange ritual is walking backward into water. Witches enter rivers or seas in reverse, step by step, while chanting incantations. Walking backward symbolizes reversal, so the intent is to reverse someone's progress, health, or blessings. Victims of such rituals often testify of sudden backsliding in life, losing jobs, relationships, or opportunities that once seemed secure. Some witches light lamps on water. They float candles or lanterns on rivers at night, using the flame as a beacon to summon spirits. Light on water becomes a signal in the unseen realm, calling for reinforcements of darkness. The sight may appear beautiful to onlookers, but it is a demonic practice. igniting covenants with marine forces. Witches also summon dreams through dripping water. They hang wet cloths or containers so drops of water fall rhythmically through the night. Each drop is timed with an incantation. This creates a rhythm in the spirit that affects their victims' sleep. Victims wake up weary, tormented by nightmares, because their dream realm was invaded, drop by drop. Another strange act is using whirlpools for possession. In rivers or seas where whirlpools form, witches perform rituals, believing the spinning water acts as a doorway for spirits. They call on entities to rise through the whirlpool and inhabit individuals or places. This is why whirlpools are feared in many cultures, not just for their natural danger, but for their spiritual associations. They also sprinkle water on graves. By pouring water over tombs, witches attempt to awaken familiar spirits tied to the dead. They mix ancestral worship with witchcraft, creating channels for spirits to harass the living. Families plagued with recurring tragedies often have such rituals performed against their lineage. Another activity is the stirring of still water. At night, witches stir lakes, ponds, or even bowls of water with sticks, chanting as they move the water in circles. Stirring symbolizes agitation. They believe this act stirs up trouble in the lives of their targets. Victims find themselves in constant confusion, unable to find peace, because their life has been stirred in the spirit. Some witches also trap voices through echoes on water. They shout names across rivers and listen to the echo. The echo to them is the soul responding. Once they hear it, they claim authority over the person's spirit. Victims of this practice often feel disconnected, as if they are losing control of their lives because their voice has been captured. They also cast powders into water currents. The powders contain mixtures of herbs, ashes, and sometimes blood. Once thrown into rivers, the currents carry them into communities. These powders are not medicine, but curses in motion. Wherever the water flows, it spreads spiritual contamination. Witches practice sealing contracts with water droplets. After rituals, they let a single drop of water fall onto parchment or cloth, declaring it a seal. That drop becomes a covenant mark, invisible to the natural eye but binding in the spirit. Victims tied to such seals find themselves trapped in cycles they cannot explain. Another strange practice is covering mirrors with water. They place mirrors at the bottom of basins, fill them with water, and then stare into them. This combination magnifies visions, giving them access to demonic revelation. They use it to spy on people's futures, steal ideas, and sabotage plans before they manifest. Some witches also chant to the ripples of water. After throwing stones into rivers, they chant as the ripples spread. Each ripple in their mind carries the curse farther. Victims of ripple chants often experience waves of repeated problems, one after another, as if trouble comes in cycles. Another practice is drinking enchanted water. Witches prepare potions by speaking into water, mixing it with powders or ashes, then drinking it. They believe this act makes them one with marine spirits, strengthening their powers. But when they want to harm others, they may give the same water to their victims, binding them into spiritual covenants unknowingly. Witches also spit into rivers. Their saliva, mixed with words, becomes a personal signature of the curse. Once released into the water, it spreads with their DNA, carrying authority over their target. Victims may suddenly feel drained, as if their personal essence has been stolen. Another strange act is using water as a veil. Witches stand behind waterfalls or pouring water to chant, believing the veil of water hides them from spiritual counterattack. Just as natural veils conceal the face, water veils conceal their activities, making them harder to discern. They also time their rituals with eclipses over water. During solar or lunar eclipses, witches gather near lakes or seas to perform sacrifices, believing the alignment of heaven and water increases their power. Victims of such rituals often face unusual crises that cannot be explained by logic because those moments were chosen for maximum spiritual impact. Witches also bury jars of water in the earth. They fill jars with water, blood, and hair or nails of their victims, then seal and bury them near riversides. These jars act as prisons for destinies. The buried water becomes a container of life force, and as long as it remains hidden, the victim struggles with bondage, stagnation, or barrenness. In the natural eye, it looks like nothing more than pottery in the soil, but in the unseen realm, it is a locked destiny crying for release. They also use water reflections at night. By holding torches or lamps over rivers, they focus on the way light reflects and moves. They interpret the ripples as messages, like reading an evil scripture. This is how they attempt to spy into the lives of others. Just as prophets receive revelation from the Spirit of God, witches imitate the process with water reflections, drawing knowledge from spirits of deception. Another strange thing is collecting tears in water. Witches capture human tears, whether of grief, pain, or loss, and mix them with water in bottles. Those bottles become tools for binding sorrow to the victim's life. Wherever that person goes, sorrow follows, because their tears were sealed in water as a covenant. This is why some people feel stuck in cycles of sadness they cannot explain. It is not just emotion, but spiritual manipulation of their tears. Witches also draw circles with water. They pour water on the ground in circular patterns, step inside and perform incantations. The water circle acts as a barrier, a spiritual boundary line. Within it, they summon spirits to appear. Victims of such rituals may suddenly feel isolated, cut off, or surrounded by invisible walls in life, because their spirit was trapped within those circles. Another practice is throwing hair into rivers. Human hair carries DNA, and witches use it as a spiritual fingerprint. When they cast it into rivers after chanting, they bind the victim's identity to the flow of water. The person's life becomes unstable, always shifting like the tides, unable to find firm ground. They also bathe idols in rivers. Wooden, stone, or metal images are washed in water while curses are pronounced. That ritual transfers spirits from the idol into the water, making the river itself an altar. Those who later drink, bathe, or fish from it unknowingly interact with those spirits. This is why some communities around certain rivers face endless spiritual battles, because the waters themselves have been defiled. Another strange act is tying cloths to riverbanks. Witches dip cloth in water, tie it to trees or poles by the river, and leave it to dry in the sun. The cloth, once tied, becomes a token of bondage. The victim's life is bound until the cloth decays. Such practices explain why some people experience long delays. They are tied spiritually, not just circumstantially. Witches also speak into wells. They chant curses into deep wells, believing their words echo into the underworld. Wells symbolize provision and survival, so when corrupted, they affect the livelihood of entire households. Victims may find themselves constantly struggling for resources because the well of their life has been spoken into. Another strange act is catching rainwater during thunderstorms. They believe thunder is a voice of the heavens and lightning is a weapon of power. By capturing that rain, they believe they harness the energy of the storm. That water is then used in stronger enchantments, capable of causing sudden fear, accidents, or destruction in the lives of their targets. They also create miniature rivers in homes. With bowls, bottles, or flowing pipes, they mimic streams indoors. Over these artificial rivers, they chant and summon spirits, believing the miniature flows connect them to greater waters. This practice brings marine influence directly into houses, leading to oppression, strange noises, and heaviness in the home. Another practice is floating effigies on rivers. They create dolls representing individuals, place them on small boats or leaves, and release them into streams. As the water carries them away, they declare that the victim's life will drift endlessly without stability or direction. Many who undergo this attack feel constantly lost, unable to settle or find purpose. They also wash charms in flowing streams. Before charms are buried under thresholds or hidden in clothing, they are dipped in rivers to receive energy. Flowing water is seen as a charger of demonic power. This is why some charms remain potent for years. It is because they were charged by water spirits before being deployed. Witches also sing lullabies to rivers. These songs, often whispered, are directed at marine entities. They sing as if soothing a child, but in reality, they are seducing spirits to respond to their call. Those lullabies awaken powers that later torment the innocent in dreams, marriages, and finances. Another strange thing is collecting water at dawn. They go to rivers before sunrise to fetch the first water of the day. To them, this water carries freshness and the power of beginnings. When cursed, it ensures the victim starts each new day with heaviness, failure, or delay. That is why some wake up weary, even after sleeping well, because dawn waters were used against them. They also mourn by water. Witches gather at riversides, wailing and crying for hours. These cries are not expressions of pain, but invocations. They are summoning forces of sorrow to spread into the lives of their victims. After such rituals, people experience sudden depression, loss, or despair without reason. Another strange act is dividing rivers with sticks. They strike the surface with rods, commanding the waters to part. Though the waters do not split visibly, the act symbolizes dividing lives, marriages, or families. Victims find themselves split apart from loved ones, unable to reconcile because division was enacted over water. They also draw maps with water stains. Pouring water on sand or cloth, they trace shapes resembling villages, houses, or even faces. Then they curse those shapes, transferring the curse to the real subjects. This is how entire communities become bound, because witches mapped them through water stains. Another practice is offering coins into fountains or rivers. While some see it as innocent wishes, witches use it for transactions. Each coin represents a life, a family, or a dream being traded. What looks like superstition is often a spiritual contract sealed by metal and water. They also boil water with incantations. As the bubbles rise, they speak curses, believing the steam carries their words into the atmosphere. Victims of such rituals experience oppression like a heavy cloud over their lives, because the steam released into the air becomes a carrier of darkness. Another strange act is naming rivers after spirits. By giving water bodies demonic names, witches dedicate them to those entities. Once dedicated, the river becomes a shrine, attracting people into bondage when they use its waters. They also wash graves with water. After burying the dead, they pour water on the tombstone while chanting, binding the spirit of the departed to return as a familiar spirit. This is why families sometimes experience hauntings or recurring patterns of death. The graves were watered with enchantments. Another practice is mixing water with soil for curses. They combine earth and water to form mud, then smear it on objects or doorways. Mud represents humanity, made from dust and carried by water. So smearing it on a target's environment brings oppression directly into their human experience. They also trap insects in water jars. Bugs like spiders, flies, or beetles are sealed alive in jars of water after incantations. Each insect symbolizes torment. As long as it suffers in the jar, the victim suffers torment in real life. Another strange act is washing weapons in rivers. Before being used for violence, knives, spears, or guns are washed in water while curses are spoken. The water dedicates the weapon, ensuring it fulfills its mission of destruction. This is why certain killings feel unusually charged with evil. It is not just crime, but witchcraft, weaponized through water. They also paint bodies with river clay. Witches cover themselves in wet clay, believing it makes them invisible to spiritual counterattack. The clay, drawn from water, acts as a shield. Victims of their attacks often feel powerless because the witch cloaked themselves with a counterfeit covering. Another practice is burying candles in rivers. After burning them halfway, witches extinguish the candles in water and leave them submerged. That half-burned candle symbolizes an interrupted life. Whoever is targeted begins projects but never finishes them, always stuck halfway. They also chant into icy waters. In colder regions, witches speak curses into frozen rivers or snow. They believe those words remain sealed in the ice until it melts, releasing curses in spring or summer. Victims suddenly face attacks during certain seasons because frozen water carried words waiting for release. When you begin to observe spiritual warfare carefully, you will notice that water is never neutral. From the beginning of creation, the Spirit of God moved upon the waters, meaning water carries life, carries memory, and carries atmosphere. Witches understand this spiritual law and they abuse it. They know that water is both physical and spiritual. It quenches thirst, but it also transmits energy. It cleanses, but it can also conceal. So when they gather near seas, rivers, ponds, and even household basins, they are not there for leisure. They are conducting business. They are transacting in realms most people ignore. One of the strangest activities witches engage in around water is speaking incantations into still waters. If you have ever walked past a river at midnight or entered a lonely beach at odd hours and heard whispers, you may not have been imagining things. They choose still waters because stillness mirrors their intentions. Still water acts like a mirror, and mirrors are gateways in the spirit. When they speak words over that surface, it is not just speech. It is project. They release images, curses, and instructions into the watery reflection, believing that anyone who later encounters that water, whether by drinking it, bathing in it, or simply crossing it, will unconsciously absorb the command. That is why many cultures warn children not to play with reflections in rivers or ponds. They may not have explained it biblically, but they understood that witches manipulate mirrors of water. A second strange thing is drawing symbols and diagrams at the edge of water bodies. Witches use sand, clay, and even ashes to trace circles, triangles, and unfamiliar marks at the shore of rivers and seas. Why the edge? Because the edge is a threshold. It is neither land nor fully water. It is an in-between place, and all thresholds are portals. The wave comes, washes away part of the symbol, but carries the intention into the water. The act seems simple, but in their world, the moment water touches those marks, the covenant is sealed. This is why you may find peculiar patterns drawn on the sand near rivers where no children have been playing. They are not doodles. They are signatures in the spirit. A third practice is singing strange songs over water. Songs are carriers of presence. Just as we worship God with psalms and He inhabits our praises, witches chant to attract demonic entities. Their songs are not for entertainment. They are coded, repetitive, hypnotic. When sung over water, the sound waves travel deeper and wider than in the air. They believe this amplifies the strength of their call, summoning spirits from beneath the waters or from distant places. Some of you have wondered why you wake up with unfamiliar melodies in your head, songs you never learned, lyrics that make no sense. It can be because someone was releasing those melodies into the waters of your region and the sound entered your atmosphere. The fourth strange thing is baptizing sacrifices in water. They take animals, dolls, or crafted figures and dip them repeatedly into rivers or basins, reciting words. This act imitates holy baptism, but it is its demonic counterfeit. Where God's baptism identifies you with His Spirit, theirs identifies the object with unclean spirits. Once baptized, they believe the sacrifice is alive spiritually and can serve as a carrier of their curse. Some even pour blood into water, mixing it with the river, so that anyone who later drinks downstream is unknowingly drinking contamination. It is why in certain places, sudden outbreaks of disease or strange communal afflictions happen near rivers, not because of bacteria alone, but because of what has been spiritually poured into the water. A fifth practice is tying knots with ropes, threads, or cloths and dipping them into water. In their worldview, a knot represents bondage. By tying knots while speaking your name and then soaking that knot in water, they believe your destiny becomes entangled. This is why some people feel like their life is tied up. They labor hard but cannot progress. Every time they almost break free, it is as if something pulls them back. In truth, it may be because in the spirit their name has been knotted into a cord that was submerged in water, keeping them bound. Another strange activity is creating false altars on water surfaces. Some witches release little boats, wooden platforms, or floating objects decorated with candles, flowers, and food into rivers and seas. To the untrained eye, it may look beautiful, like a cultural ritual, but in reality, that floating object is an altar. It is their way of saying, "We claim this water and everything connected to it." They believe that once the altar floats and drifts, the spirits of water accept the offering and strengthen their dominion over the area. That is why certain communities remain under generational oppression, poverty, or violence. They are living under the shadow of water altars erected long ago. There is also the practice of immersing themselves in water for extended hours. Some witches disappear into rivers, lakes, or seas, only to re-emerge after what seems impossible to the human lungs. During those hours, they are not merely holding their breath. They are in trance. They are in communion with marine spirits. Water to them is like a womb. It holds them while they receive instructions. This is why some report seeing figures enter water and never come out again. They did not drown. They transitioned into another dimension, using water as the door. A further act is catching rain in bowls and consecrating it. Not every raindrop is the same. The rain God sends is pure. But when witches stretch out containers, speaking over them as the rain falls, that water becomes charged with curses. They later use it to sprinkle thresholds of houses, to wash charms, or to pour at crossroads. The unsuspecting may walk across it or consume it, never realizing they have stepped into a spiritual trap. This is why some wake up and find their doorstep wet though it has not rained, because someone sprinkled water. This is why some wake up and find their doorstep wet, though it has not rained in a while, because someone sprinkled water. That was not all. Another strange operation is using water as a screen for visions. Just as a prophet may look into water and see divine revelations, like Joseph's cup of divination was once misused, witches look into basins of water, candles floating upon them, and see images. They claim to see your face, your house, your next journey. Water becomes a medium for them to spy into your destiny. This is why some of you feel watched, as though someone knows your movements too precisely. It may be because your life has been mirrored in a basin of water through enchantment. Witches also practice washing themselves ritually in rivers at certain seasons. These are not ordinary baths. They smear themselves with oils, powders, or ashes, then immerse in the water at dawn or midnight. By doing this, they believe they are cleansing themselves of weakness and drawing strength from marine powers. They return looking ordinary, but spiritually they have been recharged. The idiots should learn that they are Laksama, that they have been recharged. This is why some individuals suddenly become bold, arrogant, or unusually influential after a river ritual. They are operating under borrowed power. Even more disturbing is the drowning of effigies in water. An effigy may be a clay doll, a carved wood, or a wax figure molded to look like you. When they drown that figure in water, speaking your name, they intend your health, finances, or influence to drown as well. Many unexplained suffocations, feelings of heaviness in the chest, or dreams of drowning are spiritual symptoms of this practice. In their mind, if the effigy cannot rise from water, neither can you rise in life. They also engage in collecting dew in the early morning. Dew is pure water untouched by human hand, descending silently in the night. Witches gather it with cloths or vessels, believing it contains spiritual essence. They then mix it with powders or charms for rituals. Because dew falls on everything equally, they think it grants them access to target whoever they desire. That is why some people feel sudden coldness or weariness in the morning. It can be the effect of dew that was harvested against them. A further peculiar practice is naming waters after specific individuals. Witches may go to a river and declare, "This is the river of so-and-so," attaching your name to that stream. From that point, they treat the river as your spiritual identity. Every curse, every offering poured there is directed at you. Even if you never visit that place physically, your spirit becomes connected through the naming. And unless broken, that name-water connection can drag you into strange battles not of your choosing. There is also the calling of spirits through reflections of the moon on water. On full moon nights, they sit by rivers and stare into the water until the moon's reflection becomes their portal. They chant, they wave their hands, and they enter into trance, claiming to converse with beings of power. They are not simply enjoying the moonlight. They are using water as a mirror to commune with darkness. That is why many ungodly festivals align with lunar cycles, because witches synchronize their water rituals with the moon. Some even bury living creatures inside water jars, frogs, birds, or insects, sealing them alive. As long as the creature struggles and eventually dies inside that water, they believe the life of their target will also struggle and eventually fade. It is cruel, but it is practiced. The jar becomes a prison, and the creature a representation of a soul bound in captivity. These activities may sound bizarre to the natural mind, but they are not myths. They are strategies. They are technologies of darkness that exploit spiritual laws. The reason they seem to work is because witches understand something many believers ignore. Water is a carrier. It carries words, sounds, objects, and covenants. Until those covenants are confronted with higher authority, they continue to speak in the unseen realm. Beloved, when we speak about water, we are not speaking about something casual or insignificant. From the beginning of creation, water was one of the first elements mentioned in the scriptures. Before the earth was formed, before light was called forth, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. That is a mystery. Water has always been a carrier of spiritual energy, either for divine manifestation or for demonic manipulation. That is why witches and those who operate in darkness understand that if they want to manipulate life, if they want to tamper with destinies, if they want to interfere with the course of a person's future, they often turn to water as their point of contact. When you examine the activities of witches, you will notice they rarely ignore water. They may use it subtly, quietly, but water remains one of their strongest weapons. They know what many believers do not know, that water has memory. Water records vibrations, words, and energy, and it carries them from place to place. This is why when a witch whispers incantations over water, the sound does not end there. It is carried, multiplied, and released into the spiritual atmosphere. One strange thing witches do around water is gathering in silence, at lakes, rivers, or seas, often unclothed, because they believe removing garments gives them deeper access to the unseen realm. At those hours, they chant and release words into the water. These are not random words. They are calculated assignments meant to travel with the current. They know that water flows into homes, fields, and cities, and with that flow, their curses travel as well. Many territories that suffer unusual calamities are suffering because evil words were released into the waters that pass through those lands. Another strange thing is their practice of tying knots into ropes, dipping them into water, and speaking names over them. To the carnal eye, it seems like meaningless ritual, but spiritually, every knot represents a restriction, every knot a delay, every knot a closed door. When that rope is left soaking in water, it is as though the bondage becomes fluid, spreading into the life of the one targeted. This is why some individuals live their whole lives tied to circles of failure. It is not because they lack intelligence. It is because somewhere a witch tied their destiny to a rope soaked in water. Have you also noticed that witches often draw strange symbols around wells or fountains? Those markings are not decoration. They are portals. A symbol carved near water becomes an invitation for spirits to dwell there. And once the spirit is invited, it controls not only the water, but also anyone who drinks from it. Some of you may have grown up in villages where people drank from certain streams, and you observed that everyone from that community struggled with the same type of affliction: poverty, barrenness, mental instability. That is not coincidence. That is the power of a covenant established through witchcraft around water sources. There are also witches who submerge items into rivers or seas to bury the destinies of men. A person may give them a piece of clothing, hair, or personal belonging unknowingly, and that item is taken to water. Once it is submerged, it is as though the destiny of that person is also drowned. They walk around in life, but spiritually they are trapped underwater. That is why some people constantly dream of swimming or being pursued in water. That is why some people constantly dream of being swimming or being pursued in water. Their spirit is crying out because their life is chained in that realm. Another strange activity is the calling of names into water. Witches gather, usually at night, and call a person's name while staring into water. They believe that by fixing their gaze upon the reflection of water and mentioning the name, they can capture the soul of that individual. This is why some people suddenly feel weak or restless, as if something is pulling at them. It is because their name has been echoed into water and their soul has been summoned. Do not overlook the practice of speaking curses during rain. Many witches wait for heavy rainfall to carry out enchantments. As the rain falls, they chant, dance, or mix the rainwater with powders and oils, turning it into a potion of affliction. Rain that was meant to refresh the land is corrupted into a weapon of destruction. Some individuals experience strange illnesses or misfortunes after being caught in such manipulated rain. These are not coincidences. They are results of witchcraft manipulations using water from above. Then there is the use of bowls or basins filled with water. Witches stare into these waters to see visions and to summon spirits. That is why some call it scrying. They do not see with natural eyes, they see through the mirror of water. A basin of water becomes for them what a prophetic vision is for the child of God. Through that water, they can monitor people, track their progress, and send attacks. Some families are constantly watched not because of anything they did, but because a witch has set a basin of water to monitor their every move. Another strange practice is the manipulation of dreams through water. Many people see themselves drinking water in their dreams, or being forced into rivers, or swimming endlessly. These are not harmless dreams. They are indicators of witchcraft activity. Drinking water in a dream may mean you have consumed something spiritually poisoned. Swimming endlessly can mean your destiny is trapped in cycles of delay. Being married in water or having sexual experiences in water are indicators of marine covenants established by witches. Consider also how witches use water for sacrifices. They slaughter animals near rivers, pour the blood into water, and speak words over it. That blood becomes a seal, a covenant between the spirit world and the human world. Once the blood touches the water, it spreads across regions, crying out for enforcement. This is why Scripture often warns against the pollution of land and waters with blood. It becomes a voice in the realm of the spirit. Witches understand this, and they use it for evil. There are also those who use water to hide charms and objects. A bottle, jar, or pot filled with water may be buried in the ground or hidden under a bed, with objects placed inside it. That water acts as an incubator, keeping the evil spirit alive and active. It is why some homes feel heavy or suffocating. You are not just dealing with bad atmosphere, you are dealing with witchcraft items concealed in water containers. What do you think? Hey! They also perform rituals of bathing in rivers at specific times. This is not ordinary cleansing, it is spiritual programming. A witch may instruct someone seeking power to bathe at midnight in a river, speaking incantations while doing so. By this act, the person is initiated into covenants with marine powers. The water acts as a seal of agreement between the human and the spirit world. That person may come out looking normal, but spiritually they have entered bondage. Do not ignore how witches use tides and waves. When rivers swell or seas roar unusually, some of it is natural, but sometimes it is stirred by witchcraft activity. They ride upon those movements to send assignments across nations. They understand that water connects lands, so they use oceans as highways for spirits to travel. One curse released into the ocean can affect multiple countries touched by that water. My friend, when you understand the strange things witches do around water, you realize that water is not just physical, it is spiritual. Just as a river carries boats, so water carries words, prayers, and even curses. The enemy knows that if he can drop poison upstream, the flow will eventually reach your life downstream. That is why you cannot be casual with the waters of your destiny. Think of your life as a well. If your well is covered and protected, it refreshes you and those around you. But if your well is polluted, everything you draw from it becomes bitter. Witches seek to pollute the wells of families, communities, and nations by using water as their channel. They drop their poison in the unseen, so that what looks pure on the surface is destructive beneath. But hear this truth. Just as evil can ride on water, so can blessing. Just as words can curse through the river, so can words bless. The same way witches chant by the ocean, you can declare by the Spirit of God, and the rivers will carry your decree farther than their incantations ever could. You are not powerless. Your voice is a greater force than their whispers. Never forget that the one who made water also walked upon it. The same seas that witches use for enchantment are the seas that part at his command. The same rivers they try to manipulate are the rivers that must obey his word. And when his Spirit moves upon the waters, no dark power can resist. So rise up and protect your well. Guard the rivers of your destiny. Cover your family, your children, and your household in prayer, because prayer is like a dam that blocks every flood of witchcraft. Speak blessings over your waters, because words are seeds that flow into your tomorrow. Refuse to let the strange practices of darkness dominate your destiny. Remember, the river you drink from will determine the life you live. Drink from the living water, and you will never be enslaved by the polluted waters of witches.